All right. Hi, Mr. Milton. I'm recording my second blog post, and I'm going to talk about the structure and the main ideas of my paper that I have so far. So, what I'm writing about is the Tiananmen Square massacre, and what I'm focusing on is the activism of students and intellectuals, and their and the Tiananmen Square as a manifestation of years of oppression, uh, years of oppression against a say in the government and a tradition of activism from these intellectuals and students. So, first, what I'm going to outline is the oppression from China to its people in the early 1900s, such as Mao Zedong's first. One of the first things I was going to talk about is Mao Zedong's Great Leap Forward, which led to the deaths of many people and put 100 million people to work in really horrible conditions, and how this affected the people of China, and how this set the people of China back and caused them to speak out years later. And so first I'm going to talk about that in my and with my sources. And then I'm also going to talk about the Cultural Revolution and how in the Cultural Revolution, Mao Zedong called on students, and they created a force that that answered his call for change in China, and to completely get rid of all the traditions from the past, and condemn intellectuals. So how the students, and I'm going to connect this part of the Cultural Revolution to Tiananmen Square, because what I'm going to argue is that during the Cultural Revolution, this sentiment, and it was seen what the students could do, what force they had, and they killed many people, and it was really bad for a lot of people. And so I'm going to connect this to Tiananmen Square and say that the reaction of the government in Tiananmen Square was in effect part of a result from remembering the power of the students from the Cultural Revolution. And that's one of my other points that I'm going to discuss. And then I'm going to move on to the student activism in the actual activism. The first of which was the May 4th movement right after World War I, in which students were fueled by great nationalism, and they felt that they were cheated at the Treaty of Versailles after World War I, when the Germans were defeated. And they condemned Western movements, Westernization, and condemned ideas during then. And I'm going to compare that to Tiananmen Square and how they wanted democratic reform, how they wanted Western-style reforms. And I'm going to talk about that. And then another movement is the 100 Flowers campaign. And this is a movement that it gave hope to a lot of students and intellectuals, because to have a say in their government by the communist regime and Mao Zedong, except it was a failed plan. So I'm going to use it as an example of how intellectuals and students were condemned because of their ideas and their want for change. And even when the communist government and Mao Zedong invited them, their ideas were so great and the ideas were so many that they couldn't. The communists just could not take it, and so that was another thing. And the next, for a couple of years after that, there's really student activism for that type of change. But there was, starting in 1986, before the Tiananmen Square protests, an astrophysics professor named Feng Liji, and I'm going to use primary sources from him, basically started a movement for change in the government and democratic ideals. And I'm going to talk about that and how it's a precursor to all the things that led up to the Tiananmen Square massacre because of the reaction of Hu Yabang, which was one of the main fuels of the Tiananmen Square protests because of his death. And how in 1986, the protests by students at that time, what the effects were. And then I'm going to move on to the actual protests of the Tiananmen Square in 1989. And I'm going to talk about what happened during then, what the students wanted, and what the government, how the government communicated with them, what the government was saying to them. And then I'm going to move on and I'm going to outline that. And then basically I'm going to go on to the aftermath and how it affected China. And that's basically it. The outline, the structure of my essay. So, yeah.